Great, thank you Philip, thank you Nick, and a big thank you to you both, and to Lizzie and to Catherine as well for all of the organisation that's gone into the day today. I mean, first of all, I just wanted to start by saying what a pleasure it is to be here in Lille on such a beautiful day. It's far too easy in my job to just spend your time in Paris, and I try my best to get out of Paris as much as possible. Lille is not very far away and is halfway between Paris and London, as I see it. So it's great to be here and great to meet you all and great to see so many people. I just wanted to say three things, I suppose. One, I'll tell you a bit about myself, and then secondly, I wanted to say a bit about why we're here, and then thirdly, I wanted to talk a bit about the relationship between Britain and France, which is the theme, as Nick was saying, which unites all of us and is the reason why we're here. So I've been in Paris now as the Deputy Ambassador since July. It's my third time living and working in Paris. I used to be a lawyer and I worked for a British law firm twice in Paris in the past. I then had a rather strange career trajectory, which has ended up me being a diplomat, and have come back as the Deputy Ambassador. In between times, I've been on a posting in Geneva working in our mission to the UN. I've worked in our Prime Minister's office at Number 10, and most recently, like many of my generation, I have been working on Brexit, most recently as part of the negotiations team with the European Union that negotiated the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which we successfully negotiated from both sides a couple of years ago. And is the context, I suppose, for a lot of what you are doing and how you see the relationship with Britain in terms of business. So why are we here? Well, for us, as Nick was saying, the region, the Hauts-de-France region, and Lille in particular, is incredibly important when it comes to maintaining and building those critical commercial links between our two countries. It's as I say, it's halfway between the UK and halfway between London and Paris. And I'm really interested today to hear more about the opportunities, the challenges that you see in building those links and working between the two countries. And I know that many of you run businesses which are deeply integrated between those two countries. And I think one of my main reflections over the last 6 months has been the relationship has been through a big change. You know, I think the UK leaving the European Union has plainly changed the legal framework and the political framework within which France and the UK work together. But I think everyone in this room would agree that the task now is to look forward. And what's really struck me, as I say, since I've started my job, is how profound those commercial and people links between our two countries remain. That is the real substance of the relationship between Britain and France. It's about business and it's about people. And I think the politics can sometimes give a slightly misleading impression on that front. So I'm really interested, as I say, to hear more about your businesses and the challenges and opportunities that you see from where we are now, especially given the nature of the region. So the third point really is to talk a bit about the broader relationship, and as I say, it is a new phase in the 1,000 years that amounts to the relationship between our two countries. And I don't think any of us underestimate the nature of the change, but equally we have an extremely long and deep history. We're united through many things, especially in this region. Above all, that has seen conflict where Britain and France have fought side by side over the last years. And I think it's at this stage that I'll mention what is on all of our minds, which is the international context at the moment and what is happening in Ukraine. It's obviously a tragedy to see those images on our screens of what's unfolding. And I think Britain and France are completely united in our response to what has happened, in condemning the invasion of a sovereign, independent European country, in absolute commitment to standing up to the Russian government in what they have done. I think it has been absolutely extraordinary, the steps that both countries have taken together, side by side, and with the European Union, and with our other allies and partners, and with many countries who do not normally align with the Western alliance in response to what has happened. And I think in terms of Britain and France, much like other events over the last year or so in the world, it has really underlined how we share the same values and how we share the same objectives in the world and how we share the same commitment to democracy and peace. And I think if there is a silver lining to what has happened, I think it will accelerate the sense, the reminder that despite the political ups and downs of the last few years, Britain and France have a very strong and enduring partnership that I think we all play a very strong part in maintaining and working on. I mean, and there are, beyond Ukraine, of course, my reflection with the fantastic team that we've got in Paris and across France is that there are so many other areas where we continue to work side by side, where we have very clear common objectives, and that really is our job and our mission over the next few years. So I'm happy to hand over to Paul now, and then to take a few questions before we have lunch. Paul.
Yeah, also for me, I mean, really, really pleased to be back in Lille and to see so many old friends again. It's been a tough couple of years, I think, with COVID. We've not been able to travel around and see people face to face, but this does make it all worthwhile. So I'm going to talk about the trade and the economic relationship. I fear I will be using more statistics than Theo just used, unfortunately. If you'd like those stats afterwards, I'll be very pleased to pass them on to you. What I want to do first of all is to remind you of what the Department for International Trade team does. Firstly, and importantly, we help British companies that want to sell into France. So UK exporters who quite possibly become investors in the French market. Traditionally, that job has involved working with those businesses to identify clients or to identify partners in the French market. Increasingly at the moment, a large element of that job is responding to market access challenges that those businesses might have. So that's the first area of work that we're involved in. The second area of work is around investment into the UK and working with French businesses, French investors, what we do there is to make sure that they are connected with the expertise that they need to grow and develop. Not only in the UK market, of course, with the UK's new free trade agreements, we're also helping those French businesses to expand into other international markets. So that's what we do. You've asked me to comment on the situation as regards business between the UK and France. I think the first point I would make is quite difficult to do that at the moment. We have left the EU, but of course we have had, as I said, a very unusual couple of years. COVID has led to lockdowns, to transport collapsing, to a global recession, to issues around supply chains. So it's not been a usual period of time for us to really distill what's happened and then to say this is what's happening with UK EU or UK France business. But I will try and give you a few insights and a few flavours. My first conclusion is that the situation is not as apocalyptic or as bad as some predicted. I think we'll all remember after the referendum and through the transition period that there were a lot of extremely negative stories around about what would happen to trade between the UK and the EU. Thankfully, that has not been the case. You know, we have not seen queues of lorries from Calais to Lille, for instance. I mean, I think companies have adapted. I'm not saying that the situation has not become more challenging. Of course, it has become more challenging, and I'm also not underplaying the additional costs that businesses face, particularly small businesses. And it's definitely the case that if you follow any of the business organisations in the UK, that a lot of small businesses in the UK are thinking about their trading links with the EU. Some of them are pausing, some of them may be making strategic decisions on future markets based on these new challenges. But I think thankfully a lot of businesses are persevering and they are continuing. Another trend that we're seeing quite a lot is that UK businesses, I think to facilitate what they do, are making investments on the continent in the EU. I think this is certainly happening in France. I think Haute de France has a privileged position because of its proximity to the UK, but we are seeing UK businesses, including small firms, who want to set up here, establish an office, establish a logistics centre or a small plant or something that helps with transport, basically to make the job of selling into the French and European market easier for them. And despite those challenges, in 2021, the EU remained the biggest and most important export market for goods for the UK. So I think it's important to stress that. It's not quite the same situation as regards imports, because actually over the last couple of years, UK imports from non-EU markets, the rest of the world, have become quite important. But as I say, COVID, I think, has possibly impacted that trend. It will be interesting to see what happens with that. And I also want to stress how important the UK's trading relationship with France is. You know, despite Brexit, despite COVID, last year France was the UK's 5th biggest trading partner. That's historic. It was our 5th biggest market globally for goods, and it was our 4th biggest market for services. So there is a lot of trade that is still going on, although it is lower than it was. So I look upon 2019 as really the kind of the peak period. In 2019, bilateral trade was worth £84 billion. I told you I was going to use some stats. I'm going to apologise again, but they are quite interesting. In 2020, we saw a big drop in bilateral trade, 18 billion. So bilateral trade dropped back to £66 billion. I'm happy to say that in 2021, that figure started to rise again. So I think, you know, you can be cautiously optimistic that things are moving in the right direction. 2021 was quite tough. I mean, I think particularly those first few months of the year after the entry into force of the TCA. Of course, UK exporters immediately faced new challenges in selling into the EU market. And the impact of that was that UK exports over January, February particularly sort of dropped down quite significantly. After that, they increased, and I think towards the end of last year, we were getting back to certainly a level that was above 2020 and on the way to returning to 2017, 2018, 2019, which I think is really positive. So good recovery there as far as UK exports is concerned. I think French exports to the UK have started to bounce back as well, although not as well as UK exports to France. So there's still probably some work to do, I think, from the French side. And of course, the other factor that's important here is that whereas UK exporters immediately faced new customs procedures selling into the EU, those procedures are being implemented this year for EU exporters to the UK. So I think French businesses, German businesses, EU businesses as a whole will have to adapt to that new model. You know, there I think that you as a group of individuals with business experience, with contacts, are very well placed, I think, to either offer practical support or pass on your knowledge and your findings and expertise. Services, I think, is still a bit flat. So trading services, my calculation is that probably we are 2 billion less in trade each quarter at the moment than we used to be in 2019. Theo and I were talking about this on the train. I'm still trying to figure out why that is. You would imagine that some services have actually had a little bit of a Brexit bounce or a COVID bounce in terms of companies needing more professional support, legal advice, accountancy advice, real estate services, maybe telecom services. It doesn't seem to have played out fully at the moment, so I think that's probably an area that we are going to need to watch. I want to go on to talk about some sectors that you may be interested in and give you a flavour of what's been happening in some sectors, because of course the situation is very different. So in terms of food and drink, actually the UK is doing quite well as regards its exports to France. Last year, UK food and drink exports were only down 5% compared to 2019. So that's the French market. It's not very much of a reduction, and certainly when you compare that with Germany, Italy or Spain, where the reduction is 40%, it is quite interesting that our food exports to France have held up so well. So I think food and drink is a positive. Despite all the stories in the media about fishing and shellfish, France was still the UK's biggest market globally last year for fish and shellfish. It was the second biggest market globally last year for beverages, and for that you can read Scotch whisky. So thank you all very much for continuing to buy Scotch whisky. So they're only beaten by the US actually, and of course the US has a much bigger population. And France was the fourth biggest market in terms of importance in value for British food products and live animals. We're also doing quite well in some other areas. We're doing quite well on exports of heavy machinery, of power generation equipment, where the 5-year trend is up 400%, and cars. So even last year, UK exports of cars saw a really positive increase. Of course, where we're doing well, we are also doing less well in some areas. So the picture is not quite as rosy as regards UK exports of medical equipment or pharmaceuticals. Nick, I know that you're particularly interested in that area, or aircraft. You'll all be aware of Airbus's big investments in the UK, and of course with the collapse of international tourism, travel, air companies going under, cancelling orders, I think that's all meant that trade in aircraft and aerospace products has really bombed out over the last couple of years. Hopefully that will improve. As far as French is concerned, I mean, France is similarly doing well in some areas and not so well in others. So we are buying a lot of electricity from France. Maybe that isn't surprising, but certainly one of the biggest French exports to the UK is electricity at the moment. And we are also continuing to buy lots of French wine. French wine exports in 2021 were very positive. The 5-year trend is an increase of 30%. I guess if you're locked down, what are you going to do? Reach for the whiskey bottle if you're in France, or reach for the wine bottle if you're in the UK. But I think that, that's a positive. Again, for France, some difficult areas. So similarly, exports of French medical products, of pharmaceuticals, of French cosmetics, of French vehicles are all down, I think, last year, but hopefully they will recover. I'm going to just end now by telling you what we're doing to try to encourage that recovery process. So first of all, we have launched a new service called the Export Support Service in the UK, where any company, whether they're British or whether they are European exporters who want to access the British market, can get advice, especially if they've got an issue with market access. And you can go online and find Export Support Service, and you'll find out all about that service. Now in Europe, we've got a Market Access Centre, so that's a group of individuals who are focused on the main challenges that have been identified to us. So those challenges are VAT. I'm sure you'll be conscious of these. Customs and rules of origin, SPS checks, and mobility. Particularly if you're in the services industry, you need to get around and move and maybe spend time in Europe. So we've got experts working on all of those areas and providing advice to businesses. And of course, here in France, we've got our own market access team as well. Allied to that, we continue to identify and promote opportunities. As Theo said, of course we need to respond to challenges and problems, but we are equally interested in opportunities. You have your business networks, you know the environment over here in Hauts-de-France. We're very interested if if you're in touch with, or you know French businesses that might benefit from our support, or if you want to know more about UK exporters, if you want to explore partnerships or collaborations with UK businesses, we want to focus on the opportunities. So I think I will stop there, and Theo and I will invite your questions. I think maybe just 2 points. The support that we are providing to businesses, of course, we can't do this alone. You are the experts. You're here, you're working in the environment, and I think we do benefit a lot from the advice and support that comes from members of the Lille Chamber, of the Franco-British Chamber in Paris, etc., particularly when companies want help with some of those pressing technical challenges. So really want to reach into your network to help us with that. And finally, as I say, super keen in hearing from you on opportunities. And I will stop there, and thank you very much for your attention.